Deve mettere la mascherina.
E lei è un fascista?
Hello guys, this is episode 3 of season 4 of Italian Politician of the Week. I am Ipernick, the great is silent, and today we're talking about Vittorio Emanuele Orlando, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Italy from 1917 to 1999, and the man who represented Italy at the historical meeting in Paris near the end of his mandate. The Paris Conference is arguably one of the most important meetings of the early 20th century, hence making Orlando probably one of the most renowned politicians of this series so far. This time period is very interesting, and in fact it is rightfully well documented in multiple languages, including English, unlike most of the things I have covered previously in my videos. The reason why I made an exception with Orlando is because he was highly requested from my VIP donors, and also he played a role in the creation of the democratic constitution Italy still uses today. I'm not going to cover people that stopped being relevant before 1939. Initially I wanted to make the limit at 1946, but then I thought how some fascist personalities are also so overlooked, like Balbo, and so I decided to be more tolerant to the ones who were on the wrong side of history. Feel free to suggest Mussolini, although if you do, I won't make a video on the one you're thinking about. I think we let Orlando wait for long enough, so let's begin. Vittorio Emanuele Orlando was officially born on the 19th of May 1860 in Palermo, Sicily. I say officially because some believe he was actually born a week or two earlier. You see, on the 11th of May, Garibaldi had landed in Sicily to begin the Italian unification, and I guess his dad was so distracted by this that he delayed his trip to the notary for a few days. Orlando graduated in law and became a renowned and important jurist and academic. He is considered one of the pioneers of the field, since he wrote among the first manuals regarding administrative and constitutional law in the early 1890s. He was elected into parliament in 1897, where he stayed until 1931. He was affiliated to Togliatti, for whom he was undersecretary and minister several times, specifically the ministries of education and justice. His first big law proposal was passed in 1902 out of the Commission for the Preservation of the Written Works of Leonardo da Vinci. As Orlando was slowly climbing the ranks of parliament, Togliatti was the most powerful man in the kingdom, second only probably to the king. Before 1912, only the wealthy men of the kingdom, who didn't care what the Pope had to say, could vote. Most of them were unreligious liberals. But with the introduction of universal male suffrage, Togliatti had to surround himself with the brightest collaborators at his disposal to make sure the socialists under Turati wouldn't snatch the cabinet under his nose, especially when there is a lot of internal competition. Orlando was one of Togliatti's affiliates. However, Antonio Salandra wasn't. But I guess him becoming prime minister in 1914 isn't necessarily the worst thing that could happen, right? Right? After the 1913 election, the socialists won a lot of votes, and their support became essential to earn the parliamentary vote of confidence. Socialists hate wars, and since Togliatti had led Italy into a war with Libya just a few months before, Togliatti couldn't rule anymore, and so Salandra succeeded him. His first cabinet didn't last very long, because after the death of Franz Ferdinand, divisions struck the Italian political environment. The nation was split between the ones who wanted to join the war and the ones who didn't. Salandra wanted to join, but Togliatti didn't think Italy could handle two wars one after another, and so he opted for staying in neutral. Divisions rose up also among the socialists, with Turati being opposed to interventionism while Mussolini wasn't. Eventually, interventionism won, and Salandra made a new cabinet by changing a few ministers and by putting a Republican called Barzilai as his deputy. Initially, the prime minister wanted to stay faithful to the old pact done nearly 30 years before with Austria and Germany, but when Austria decided not to give up any of its territorial holdings, Salandra decided to make a secret deal with France and England in April 1915. At the time, Sonnino was a foreign minister and he was largely credited for this secret deal. This will become important later. Italy was finally in the First World War. Their first targets were South Tyrol, but even after a big offensive campaign in May 1916, the army couldn't break through Austrian defenses and Salandra had to step down in shame. Due to the delicate situation, a government of national unity was implemented under Paolo Boselli, where Orlando was Minister of Interior Affairs. It only fell apart in late 1917 after the Battle of Caporetto, where the Germans and the Austrians, who now could get reinforcements from the east due to Russia's surrender, attacked Italian lines. The general head of the army, Luigi Cadorna, was totally unprepared, and the result was 300,000 prisoners. It got so bad that they had to abandon their defenses and fall back into the Piave River. Boselli found it necessary to resign, and Orlando took his place. One of the first things Orlando did as prime minister was to fire Cadorna and put Armando Diaz in the army instead. Then he had to deal with the diplomatic repercussions of the London Treaty, the secret treaty Italy had signed with the English, French and Russians, which got released after the October Revolution. Austria and Germany were very pissed, but they had already taken out their anger on the battlefield, so that was pretty much solved. The other issue came with the Vatican. When the English press translated the London Treaty from Russian to English, remember that back then only the Russian version was public, it seemed that the Article 15 of the pact excluded the Vatican from peace negotiations. Orlando decided to release the Italian version too, in order to erase any ambiguity. However, the foreign minister Sidney Sonnino refused, because, as I already said previously, he was the one responsible for the treaty, and since most of the parliament didn't know about its existence until then, he was afraid of the consequences. Plus, Sonnino and Orlando hated each other pretty much, so eventually in December, Sonnino defended himself in parliament about the treaty by saying that he did it to make sure Italy had a relevant role in the war. Since he succeeded, people let him be, although it was pretty much on thin ice. Things looked up for Italy in 1918. Under the leadership of Diaz, the army gained several victories over the Austrians. Orlando considered himself satisfied with the political results of the war. On the 15th of December 1918, he made a speech to the Senate where he declared that Italy today is a great state, not by virtue of an indulgent diplomatic concession, but because it has revealed it is capable of acting and to fight on its own will just as effectively as the other contemporary states. After this speech, the press started to refer to him as Premier Victory, though this wouldn't last. In January 1919, Orlando and Sonnino met in Paris with Woodrow Wilson, George Clemenceau, and Lloyd George to attend the peace conference. This meeting's intent was to decide the fate of Europe and the rest of the world for many years to come, so no big deal. Orlando had hoped to make the war worth it for Italy by asking the Allies for the annexation of South Tyrol and the Eastern Peninsula. It had become clear at this point that Italy was not going to get Dalmatia, as it was previously promised in the London Treaty, but Orlando thought that if he played his cards right, he might actually get Fiume as a consolation prize, if he didn't push for Dalmatia. However, Sonnino had a different opinion. Unlike Orlando, Sonnino was more keen to colonies and less in favor of self-determination. Furthermore, since he had made the London Treaty, he felt more personally involved in making sure the other countries stayed faithful to their word. This eventually led to Orlando and Sonnino making fools out of themselves in front of the international community, because Orlando was trying to be all cordial while carefully hinting to the fact that he'd be interested in taking Fiume, while at the same time Sonnino demanded Dalmatia as well. This strategy proved useless, and at the Treaty of Saint-Germain, Italy got none of the two territories. According to some sources, when the Allies refused to give in to Orlando's request, he started crying. While While George tried to console him, Clemenceau is remembered saying, "Man, I wish I could piss as much as he can cry. Keep in mind that the guy had prostate problems and diabetes, so it was a very powerful statement." Wilson will later describe Orlando unfit to rule and accuse them of not representing the will of the Italians, something very rich coming from an American president who never won the popular vote. Sadly, Orlando didn't have the guts to point that out and resigned in June 1919. During the early phases of Italian fascism, he was president of the Chamber of Deputies, though he was succeeded by Enrico De Nicola, future president of the Republic, who will witness the escalation we all know and love. Between 1924 and 1931, Orlando tried to moderate fascism from the inside, without much success really. He remained in parliament until 1931, just long enough for him to retire from academic life. After that, you could not teach anymore without joining the fascist party, so I guess he dodged a bullet. That being said though, Orlando thought that without fascism, communism would take over, so he swallowed the toad as they say, and went along with the regime, even praising Mussolini in a private letter in 1935, in the occasion of the war with Ethiopia. That same letter was later published to encourage young people to enlist. Nothing really happened to him until 1943. A week before King Victor Emanuele III deposed Mussolini, he asked Orlando to take part in the writing of Badoglio's proclamation that announced the end of the fascist regime and the side switch in the Second World War. During Bonovi's government, he was president of the Chamber of Deputies, and from 1946 to 1948, he contributed in the writing of the Constitution by being elected in the Constituent. He then was part of the Senate until his death in 1952. Funnily enough, despite collaborating with the governments of national unity, he never really liked them. And even after the Gasperi got rid of them, Orlando still did not like him because he found them too weak. The Gasperi was the man that negotiated with the Allies after the end of the war, something that Orlando did too 20 years before, so it's very interesting for him to express his opinion on the matter. According to Orlando, the Gasperi was too soft and the concessions Italy received were given out of pity and not because they deserved it. Could be, but at least the Gasperi didn't cry about it. Probably because his expectations were low, but that's beside the point. The Gasperi is someone else I'd love to talk about in the near future. Orlando's last speech in the Senate was done when he was 92, and it was in opposition of the electoral law that would have introduced the majority award, also called the Scelba electoral law and the scam law. If you watched the Einaudi video, you would know exactly what I'm talking about, and you would also know that the law didn't pass at the end, and the Gasperi's party, Democrazia Cristiana, paid for it by receiving less votes than the previous election. But Orlando didn't live long enough to see that. He will die of old age in 1952. Orlando is remembered today as a patriot, somebody who took pride in being born shortly after the event that led to the unification of Italy. He was someone who cared about making Italy look strong and powerful in the world. He did a lot to make sure this happened, even going as far as to make compromises with nationalists, fascists, and even communists. But he succeeded in the end without crying too much. Thanks again guys for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out my merch, the subscribe star, the Discord, and the list goes on. I will see you next week with a brand new video.